Wind howled like a pack of starving wolves as snow piled up in towering drifts outside my window. The streetlights flickered, barely visible through the blizzard's thick swirling fury. Somewhere out there, buried beneath nature's wrath, was the woman responsible for this mess. Patricia Harrington, HOA president, neighborhood dictator, and the reason I was currently sipping hot cocoa instead of clearing the streets with my snowplow. She had banned it, said it was an eyesore. Now, with the storm of the century hammering our town, she was out there screaming for help, trapped in her driveway, buried under 5 feet of snow. And me, Mike Sullivan, was about to enjoy the greatest moment of karma I had ever witnessed. Hello, beautiful people. Before we dive into this story, if HOA tyrants drive you crazy too, you're in the right place. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Just one click makes a huge difference. Now, let's get into it. 2 weeks ago, I never would have imagined this moment. Back then, it was just another Tuesday in the quiet HOA-controlled suburb where I lived. I had moved here a few years ago, thinking it would be a nice place to settle down, affordable, decent neighbors, nothing crazy. That was before I realized the true power of the Homeowners Association, and at the heart of it all was Patricia, 50-something, permanently scowling, and armed with an arsenal of HOA violation notices. She made it her life's mission to enforce rules no one cared about. The color of your shutters, the height of your grass, even the type of trash cans you used, everything was under her watchful eye, and God help you if you broke a rule. Unfortunately, I had something that Patricia despised more than anything, a snowplow. Not just any snowplow, but a beautiful, powerful beast of a machine that could clear an entire street in minutes. I used it every winter, helping neighbors dig out of bad storms and even making a little side money on the worst days. It was loud, it was big, and according to Patricia, it was ruining the charm of the neighborhood. She had been after me for months, complaining that it didn't fit the aesthetic. And then, just before winter truly hit, she got her way. The HOA meeting was a nightmare. Patricia, standing at the front of the room with her ridiculous clipboard, looked smug as she announced the new community aesthetic regulation. According to her, large utility vehicles like my snowplow were no longer allowed in driveways or on neighborhood streets. That's when Colonel James Winters stood up. He was new to the neighborhood, a retired military man in his 60s with a ramrod-straight posture and calculating eyes that seemed to evaluate everything as a potential threat or asset. The colonel had moved in just 3 months ago, and no one knew much about him except that he'd served for decades and had some background in emergency management. "Ms. Harrington," the colonel said, his voice measured but authoritative, "I'd like to point out that in my experience overseeing disaster response in 3 different war zones, removing functional equipment before winter is tactically unsound. Perhaps a compromise designating a storage area within the community for emergency equipment." I shot him a grateful look, but Patricia simply smiled, that condescending smile of hers. "Thank you for your military perspective, Colonel," she said, emphasizing the word military like it was irrelevant to civilized suburban life. "But this is Oakwood Estates, not Afghanistan. We have standards here." The colonel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, not anger, but something colder, more calculating. He simply nodded and sat down, making a note in a small book he always carried. I argued, of course. I pointed out that we lived in a place where winters were brutal, where storms could leave us stranded for days if roads weren't cleared. But Patricia waved me off with that condescending smirk she always wore. "The city plows will handle it," she said, dismissing me like I was some child. "Besides, your machine is an eyesore. We have standards in this community." The worst part, most of the HOA board, a bunch of spineless followers, nodded along with her. A few neighbors looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. I was furious. How could people be this blind, this stupid? But I knew arguing with Patricia was pointless. She had power and she loved wielding it. So I did what I could. I warned them. I told them they were making a terrible mistake, that they would regret this decision when the next big storm hit. Patricia laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, please," she said, "you're acting like we live in the Arctic. A little snow never hurt anyone." Little snow, right? 2 weeks later, the blizzard hit. It wasn't just bad, it was historic. A sudden temperature drop combined with a moisture-heavy system turned what was supposed to be a moderate snowstorm into a whiteout nightmare. The wind was relentless, blowing snow so thick you couldn't see 5 feet in front of you. The power flickered in some houses, and by nightfall, the roads were completely impassable. The city plows nowhere to be seen, too overwhelmed, too understaffed, and focused on clearing major highways, which meant our neighborhood was completely buried. At first, Patricia still clung to her delusions. She sent out a message on the neighborhood group chat assuring everyone that this was just a temporary inconvenience. "The city will be here soon," she insisted. "Just be patient." The colonel responded almost immediately. "Ms. Harrington, according to my contact at the emergency management office, the city has diverted all plows to the hospital routes and main thoroughfares. They estimate our neighborhood won't be reached for 48-72 hours. I suggest we implement contingency plans immediately. Patricia's response came quickly. Colonel, please don't spread panic. I've been running this HOA for 12 years and we've never had an issue with snow removal. I couldn't help myself. We had my snowplow for the last 11 winters, Patricia. She didn't respond to that. The next morning, patience had run out. People were panicking. Some had run out of food. Elderly neighbors were trapped in their homes. Parents with young children were getting desperate. And Patricia had finally realized she was in trouble. Her house, like most others, was completely snowed in. The wind had created huge drifts blocking doors and windows. Her car was buried so deep you couldn't even see it. She had tried to dig herself out with a shovel, but within minutes she slipped on the ice, landing face first in the snow. From my nice, warm house I could hear her muffled shriek. And then, as if the universe itself had been waiting for this moment, my phone started buzzing. Neighbors, one after another, asking no, begging me to fire up my snowplow. I smiled, taking another sip of my cocoa. Oh, now you need my help, I muttered to myself. My phone rang. It was the Colonel. Sullivan, he said without preamble, Emily Chen at 42 Oak Street is going into diabetic shock. Her husband says she's been rationing insulin, but they're out now. The ambulance can't get through. My satisfaction curdled. Emily was a kindergarten teacher, sweet as they come, and one of the few who'd voiced concerns about the snowplow ban. Now she was paying the price for Patricia's ego. I haven't moved the plow, I said, tension tightening my voice. It's in storage across town. Patricia made sure I couldn't keep it here, remember? The Colonel's voice was flat. You and I both know that's not true, Sullivan. I've seen you working on it in your garage. This isn't the time for personal vendettas. I felt the heat rise to my face. How did he know I'd been careful? Before I could respond, I heard it, the sound I had been waiting for, a high-pitched, desperate scream coming from outside. I walked to my window and looked out, grinning. Patricia was standing in her driveway, wrapped in a ridiculous fur-lined coat, waving her arms frantically. Her face was bright red from the cold, her perfectly styled hair now plastered to her forehead with snow, and despite all her previous arrogance, she was yelling the one thing I never thought I'd hear from her. Somebody help me. I'm stuck. For a moment, I just stood there, enjoying the sight, the all-powerful HOA queen reduced to a shivering, helpless mess. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. Sullivan, the Colonel's voice brought me back. Are you still there? Yeah, I said, watching Patricia struggle. I'm looking at our HOA president right now. She seems to be having some trouble with the little snow she was so dismissive about. I don't give a damn about Patricia's predicament, the Colonel said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Emily Chen needs help now. Are you going to be part of the solution, or are you going to let an innocent woman suffer because you're enjoying your revenge too much? That hit me like a slap. I could have rushed out right then, could have fired up my snowplow and started clearing the street, but where was the fun in that? No, Patricia needed to understand. She needed to feel the weight of her own stupidity. So instead, I grabbed my phone and sent out a single message to the neighborhood chat. I thought snowplows were against the rules. The group chat exploded. Some people, desperate for help, begged me to ignore the ban. Others, clearly enjoying the situation as much as I was, started posting laughing emojis. And Patricia saw it. She whipped around, looking directly at my house, and I swear I could hear her grinding her teeth. I waved at her from my window. The Colonel's message appeared in the chat, stark and devoid of emojis or exclamation points. Emily Chen is experiencing a medical emergency. The ambulance cannot reach her. This isn't about rules anymore. Then came a photo, Emily's husband holding her limp hand, her face pale and drawn. The sight of it made my stomach clench. The storm had only just begun, but the real show was about to start. Patricia's screams faded into the howling wind, but the desperation in her voice was unmistakable. She wasn't just uncomfortable anymore, she was panicking. And she had every reason to. The blizzard hadn't slowed, if anything it had gotten worse. The snow was still coming down in thick sheets, and the temperature had dropped so low that even stepping outside for a few minutes without the right gear could be dangerous. The roads were completely buried. No one was getting in or out of the neighborhood, and thanks to Patricia's ridiculous ban on my snowplow, no one was getting any help either. I stood by my window, sipping the last of my cocoa as my phone buzzed with more messages. The neighborhood chat was in chaos. People were finally realizing just how bad things were. One neighbor, an older man named Mr. Jensen, was running low on heart medication. The young mother Sarah was trapped inside with her 2 kids and had no way to get to the store for formula. Several others had lost power and were already struggling to keep warm. But the real kicker was that the city plows still hadn't arrived. The messages got more frantic as the hours passed. People begged for updates. Some started to turn on Patricia, demanding to know why the HOA hadn't planned for something like this. Others just sent angry messages about how stupid it was to ban snowplows in a place that got hit by winter storms every year. And then there was Patricia herself. She hadn't said a word in the chat since the storm started, but now, finally, she sent a message. I understand that this is a difficult situation for all of us, but we must remain calm and follow proper procedures. The city will be here soon. No need to panic. It was the worst thing she could have said. Instantly, the chat exploded with angry responses. People weren't just mad, they were furious. They had followed HOA rules, trusted that things would be handled properly, and now they were paying the price for Patricia's arrogance. Some people even suggested ignoring the HOA entirely and clearing the streets themselves, but without the right equipment, that was almost impossible. And still the storm raged on. A new message appeared from the colonel. I've walked to the Chen residence with emergency supplies. Emily needs medical attention within the next 2-3 hours or the situation will become critical. Sullivan, this is now a matter of life and death. I felt a twinge of guilt. Was I really going to let someone suffer just to prove a point to Patricia? By the evening, the situation had escalated from frustrating to dangerous. I got a call from my neighbor Tony, who lived 2 houses down. He was an easygoing guy, never involved in the HOA nonsense, but now he sounded genuinely worried. Mike, man, we need your snowplow. People are running out of food and my wife's got a fever. I tried to get out, but my car is completely buried. No one's getting through this mess without help. I looked outside again. The snow was still coming down hard, piling up against doors and windows. Some houses had drifts so high that people couldn't even step outside without climbing over a wall of snow. I'd love to help, but you know the rules, I said, keeping my tone neutral. There was a long pause on the line before Tony let out a heavy sigh. Look, man, I know you're pissed at Patricia. We all are, but people are in trouble. We need to do something. I thought about it for a moment. The truth was, I wanted to help. I always had. But I also wasn't about to let Patricia and the HOA off the hook so easily. If I went out there now, cleared the roads, she'd take the credit. She'd spin the story to make herself look like the hero, say that she allowed me to plow for the good of the neighborhood. No, she needed to suffer a little longer. She needed to understand what she had done. A hard knock at my door startled me. When I opened it, the colonel stood there, snow covering his military-style parka, his face grim. I've just come from the Chens, he said without greeting. Emily's blood sugar is dangerously low. Her husband is melting snow for water, but they need medical help. I can't just... You can, and you will, the colonel cut me off. I understand your grudge against Patricia. God knows I've compiled enough evidence of her mismanagement to have her removed 10 times over. But this isn't about her anymore. This is about who you are when people need you. I stared at him. What do you mean, evidence? A small, cold smile crossed his face. I didn't move here by accident, Sullivan. I've been documenting HOA abuses across the country for a veterans advocacy group. Patricia's little kingdom is just one of many I'm investigating. But right now, that doesn't matter. What matters is what you're going to do next. As if on cue, another sound cut through the storm, Patricia screaming again. I looked out and saw her standing in her driveway, a shovel in her hands, pathetically trying to clear the massive snowdrift that had buried her car. She wasn't getting anywhere. The snow was too deep, too heavy. Every time she tossed a shovelful, the wind just blew it right back in her face. It was almost comical. If she wasn't such a menace, I might have felt bad for her. She slipped again, landing hard on her backside. I could see her face twist in rage as she pulled out her phone. A few seconds later, another message popped up in the chat. Mike, as HOA president, I am officially requesting that you use your snowplow to clear the roads for the safety of this community. I burst out laughing. Of course now she wanted my help. After all the time she had complained about my ugly snowplow after banning me from using it, now she was begging for it. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Your move, Sullivan, the colonel said quietly. But know this, whatever you decide will show everyone exactly who you really are. I took a deep breath, then typed out a simple response. I thought the city was handling it. The chat went silent for a moment, then more messages started flooding in, mostly from people who had finally had enough of Patricia's nonsense. The city isn't coming, Patricia. We've been waiting all day. We need help. Just admit you screwed up. Even Tony chimed in. Mike, please, man, screw the HOA. Just do it. I stared at the screen, letting the messages pile up. Then, after a few minutes, I sent one final message. If you want my help, Patricia needs to officially lift the snowplow ban, and she needs to do it in writing. There was another pause, then Patricia's response appeared. Fine, the snowplow ban is lifted. I shook my head. That wasn't good enough. I sent another message. That sounded a little forced. How about you say it like you mean it? The chat exploded with laughing emojis. I could practically hear Patricia grinding her teeth through the screen. A few agonizing minutes later, she sent another message. I, Patricia Harrington, officially revoke the ban on snowplows in this neighborhood. The colonel studied me, his expression unreadable. Is your pride worth more than Emily Chen's life? Think carefully, Sullivan. This moment will define you. I felt a surge of shame. He was right. What was I doing? Was I really putting someone's life at risk just to humiliate Patricia? At that moment, a new message appeared in the chat, a photo from Emily's husband showing her slumped in a chair, barely conscious. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut. Finally, that was what I had been waiting for. I put my phone down, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. The wind hit me like a wall, but I barely noticed. I trudged through the deep snow to my garage, yanked the door open, and fired up my snowplow. The engine roared to life, the headlights cutting through the darkness as I pulled out into the street. I could see people stepping out of their houses, watching in relief as I started clearing a path. Some cheered, others just stood there, bundled up against the cold, waiting for their turn to be freed from their frozen prisons. The colonel appeared beside me, shouting over the engine, I'll direct you, the Chens first, then the medical priority list I compiled. He climbed into the cab without waiting for a response. And Patricia, she just stood there, watching with a look of pure humiliation on her face. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The snowplow roared as I drove it straight through the thick wall of snow that had been holding the neighborhood hostage. The blade cut through the frozen mess like butter, sending icy chunks flying in every direction. The headlights illuminated the swirling blizzard as I pushed forward, reclaiming the roads from the storm. For the first time in 2 days, people had hope. Neighbors gathered on their porches, bundled in thick coats and scarves, watching in awe as I carved a path through the suffocating white prison they had been trapped in. Some waved, others just stood there, too cold and too exhausted to do anything but stare in relief. A few even clapped. They weren't just happy to see the plow in action, they were happy to see Patricia finally lose. Turn left here, the colonel directed. The Chens are at the end of this cul-de-sac. I nodded, focusing on the road ahead, pushing mountains of snow to the side to create a clear path. Not so fast, the colonel said as we approached the Chen house. We need to make sure the ambulance has room to turn around. I slowed down, carefully widening the path. Within minutes, we had cleared a large area in front of the Chen's house. The colonel jumped out and ran to the door, shouting that help was coming. I saw Emily's husband at the window, relief washing over his face. As I worked my way through the main road, clearing space for people to move, I couldn't help but glance over at Patricia's house. She stood there, arms crossed, shivering in the cold as she watched me do the very thing she had fought so hard to prevent. Her hair was a mess, her fur-lined coat covered in frost, and her expression was pure defeat. She knew it, I knew it, the entire neighborhood knew it, she had lost. But I wasn't finished with her yet. When I reached her driveway, I slowed the plow to a crawl. The massive mound of snow in front of her car was an easy fix. I could clear it in seconds. Instead, I grinned and did the opposite. With precise control, I angled the blade just right and pushed an even bigger pile right in front of her garage. The colonel, who had been coordinating with emergency services on his phone, looked up sharply. Sullivan, what are you doing? The moment Patricia realized what I was doing, her face turned bright red. She stomped forward, waving her arms like a lunatic, her voice shrill even over the roar of the plow. Hey, you can't do that, you're supposed to be clearing the roads. I leaned out the window and shrugged. I thought you didn't like my plow messing up the neighborhood's aesthetic. She fumed, her breath visible in the freezing air. This isn't funny, Mike. I lifted the ban. You have to plow my driveway too. I tapped a finger against the side of the cab, pretending to think about it. Well, technically, the ban is lifted for the street. No one said anything about driveways. The colonel's hand clamped down on my shoulder. That's enough. The ambulance is 5 minutes out. We need to clear a path to the Thompson house next. They have an elderly couple with no heat. The neighborhood chat exploded with laughing emojis as people watched the scene unfold. A few brave souls even stepped out of their houses, watching with barely concealed amusement as Patricia stood there, helpless and fuming. Fine, she screeched, throwing her hands up. Just do it and stop playing games. The colonel leaned in, his voice low but forceful. Sullivan, I understand the temptation, but we have priorities. Save the retribution for later. I hesitated, torn between my desire to see Patricia suffer and the knowledge that others still needed help. What would Emily Chen say if she knew you were wasting time on a personal vendetta while she was fighting for her life? The colonel pressed. I took my time. I could have cleared her driveway in under a minute, but instead I dragged it out, moving slowly, letting her stand there in the cold while I carefully maneuvered the plow. By the time I finally cleared the space in front of her house, she looked like she was ready to burst into flames from sheer humiliation. Satisfied, I moved on, carving paths to the homes that actually deserved help. Mr. Jensen got his driveway cleared first so he could get to the pharmacy for his medication. Sarah's path was next, and I made sure to clear all the way to her car so she could drive out safely with her kids. Every house that had been hit hardest by the storm got my attention before I even thought about touching the areas around Patricia's house. In the distance, I heard sirens. The ambulance was finally able to get through. The colonel nodded with satisfaction, checking off names on his list as we worked through the neighborhood. "You know," he said after a while, "what you did to Patricia was petty." I bristled. She deserved it. Perhaps, he conceded, but it cost us valuable time Emily Chen almost didn't have. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. He was right. I'd let my desire for revenge cloud my judgment. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. The colonel's stern expression softened slightly. The measure of a person isn't how they act when everything's going their way, it's how they act in a crisis. Patricia failed that test, don't you fail it too. By the time I was done, the worst of the crisis was over. People could get out, get supplies, check on their friends and family. I parked the plow back in my garage and trudged inside, exhausted but satisfied. The job was done, and best of all, Patricia had been humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. The colonel stood in my driveway, watching me with an appraising look. "You did good work today, Sullivan, once you got your priorities straight." "Thanks for the push," I admitted. He nodded. "I've been documenting HOA abuses for 3 years now. Patricia is one of the worst I've seen, but what happened today, that's going to be the centerpiece of my report." Report. For the state legislature, we're pushing for HOA reform, limits on their power, more homeowner protections. Today is proof of why it's needed. I stared at him, a slow smile spreading across my face. "So you came here specifically to investigate her?" "I go where the evidence leads me," he said cryptically, "and Patricia Harrington has quite the reputation." The fallout didn't take long. The next morning, the city plows finally rolled through, too late to make any real difference. They cleared the remaining roads, but the damage had already been done. People had seen firsthand what happened when they relied on Patricia's leadership, and they weren't going to forget it anytime soon. By noon, an emergency HOA meeting was called. I didn't bother attending in person. I knew exactly how it was going to go. Instead, I kicked back on my couch, pulled up the group chat, and watched as the messages poured in. "We need new leadership. This was a disaster. Someone has to be held accountable. We almost froze to death because of Patricia's ridiculous rules." The flood of complaints was endless, and then came the best one of all. I motioned to remove Patricia as HOA president. I grinned. It was happening faster than I had even hoped. More messages followed, seconded, thirded, fourth. And just like that, it was done. Within an hour, Patricia Harrington was officially voted out of her position. No ceremony, no drawn-out debate, just a swift, decisive removal. A new message appeared, this one from the colonel. "I've submitted my full report on Patricia's mismanagement to the HOA board, including financial discrepancies I uncovered in the HOA's accounting. She may be facing more than just removal from the board." The chat erupted again as people demanded to know what financial discrepancies he was talking about. The colonel simply replied with a single file attachment, a detailed spreadsheet showing years of questionable expenditures, inflated contractor fees, and what appeared to be kickbacks from vendors. Patricia's response was immediate and defensive. "These are lies. I will sue for defamation." The colonel's reply was calm and devastating. "Truth is an absolute defense against defamation, Ms. Harrington. I have receipts." A few minutes later, Tony knocked on my door, grinning like a kid on Christmas. "You see the chat?" he asked, stepping inside and shaking the snow off his boots. I nodded, chuckling. "Yeah, about time." "They want you to take over," he said, raising an eyebrow. "A lot of people think you should be in charge." I snorted. "No way. Last thing I need is a bunch of meetings about lawn decorations and mailbox heights." Tony laughed. "Figured you'd say that, but hey, you're a hero, man. You saved the whole damn neighborhood." "I just did what needed to be done," I shrugged. "Yeah, but the way you did it," he grinned. "That was legendary." The colonel joined us, brushing snow from his coat as he entered. "Sullivan, I wanted to let you know that Emily Chen is stable. The doctors say she'll make a full recovery thanks to getting help when she did." Relief washed over me. "That's good to hear." I also wanted to tell you that the HOA board has voted unanimously to establish an emergency preparedness committee, the colonel continued. They'd like you to head it, given your equipment and expertise. I raised an eyebrow. Me, after all this. Sometimes it takes a disaster to change people's minds, the colonel said simply. They've also voted to purchase 2 community snowplows to be maintained with HOA funds and stored in a dedicated facility. Tony burst out laughing. Oh man, Patricia must be having a meltdown. The colonel's normally stern face cracked into a small smile. She's currently packing her things from the HOA office. I believe she mentioned something about moving to Florida. Later that evening, I took one last look outside. The roads were clear, the storm had passed, and life was returning to normal. But Patricia, she wasn't going to recover from this, not anytime soon. She had spent years making everyone else's lives miserable, wielding her HOA power like a weapon. But in the end, the storm had taken that power away, and the best part, she had done it to herself. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I smiled to myself. Maybe next time she'd think twice before messing with the guy who owned a snowplow. Outside my window, I could see the colonel making his methodical way through the neighborhood, his small notebook in hand, documenting everything for a report that would, hopefully, prevent other neighborhoods from suffering under the tyranny of another Patricia Harrington.